Hi everyone, welcome to class. I'm sorry I couldn't be here. It's just impossible to be in two places at once, so I thought I'd make a video of what I was going to be teaching today. And Guadalupe Navarro, who is a graduate student here in the jewelry and metalsmithing area, he is going to be here in the class, so if anybody has any questions, he can answer the questions for you. I wanted to talk about two activities that are happening this week at the School of Art that you all can go to, because remember, you guys have those activities that you need to attend that are happening at the School of Art, and this week there's two of them, so you can knock two out in 1 week, and you need to write response papers on those two events that you are attending. And the responses can be simply observations about what you're seeing. Maybe you find a piece of art that you really respond to, and you want to write about that and what your thoughts, your feelings, and emotions are around that piece of work. Anyway, there's two activities going on, or events going on this week. One of them is happening on the 29th at 5:30 at Lamar Dodd School of Art, and that is a lecture by a curator, Lauren Haynes. And Lauren is a curator at Crystal Bridges Museum in Bentonville, Arkansas. And what is a curator? Well, a curator is just in its very simple definition, curator is someone who looks at collections of objects, and for purposes of this lecture, she's a museum curator, so she oversees the collections of objects at the Crystal Bridges Museum. She recently curated an exhibition there on Georgia O'Keeffe, and then her area of expertise is contemporary African American studies. So she will be talking about some of the exhibitions that she's curated. And the curator's role is really interesting because they're really behind the scenes, and what they're doing is they are creating the experiences that you as viewers, as the audience, see when they walk into a museum. So hopefully you all can attend that lecture and learn more about what her role is as a curator and some of the exhibitions that she's curated. So that's happening on the 29th, again at 5:30 in S151. And then there is the art opening that is happening on Friday, February 1st, and that's at 6 o'clock. And that's also happening at Lamar Dodd School of Art. And a number of you have emailed me and asked if that was mandatory. And if you have obligations, prior obligations, then no, I don't expect you all to be there. But I think it's a really good event to go to because you're going to have the opportunity to see 5 exhibitions that are going on at the school. There'll be a DJ there. There will also be a photo booth, and there'll be free snacks and drinks. So that's a real plus, right? So it's really has multiple events happening at once, and you'll really get to see and feel kind of what is happening over at the School of Art. So again, those are two events that you all can go to this week, and I highly recommend you guys getting those events in sooner rather than later. You don't want to be at the end of this class and trying to scramble to find events. And I'll be at the event on Friday, so bonus, come and find me, and I can show you some of the artwork that's on display, and we could talk about it if you would like, and you can let me know some of your thoughts and feelings on that. All right, so that kind of takes care of the sort of housekeeping and again, the events that are happening this week. And the next thing that I want to talk about is cuttlefish. And I want to talk about some of the fun facts of cuttlefish. And there is a wonderful video that you can see in the background, True Facts About Cuttlefish. You can find that on YouTube, and it's about a 4-minute video, and you're sure to be entertained by that video. So just some really interesting facts about cuttlefish is that they actually have 3 hearts, and 2 of those hearts will pump blood to their gills, and then 1 circulates blood throughout their body. So cuttlefish they're very fascinating creatures, and they're part of the cephalopod family, and they're invertebrates. Something else about cuttlefish is that they actually can change color. So they can change into any color that they want to be, depending on their surroundings. And so based on the colors in their surroundings, they can actually morph and change into those colors as a way to protect themselves or to disguise themselves. Really interesting is that although they can change colors, they are actually colorblind. So another interesting thing about cuttlefish is that they can actually disguise themselves as the male cuttlefish can disguise themselves as female cuttlefish. So they will take on the qualities of a female cuttlefish so that they can trick the other male cuttlefish, and they could get the female cuttlefish that they're interested in. So they do a little bit of gender bending, if you will. Let's see. A couple other things about cuttlefish. They can actually morph their forms and morph their textures. So again, they look like and they take on the qualities of their surroundings as a way, again, to disguise themselves. They're really masters of disguise. And something really fascinating about their vision is that they can see both forward and backwards. And instead of their lenses actually moving, it is their eyes that move. So their eyes can move forward and backwards. And their eyes are also enormous compared to their body size. So just some really fascinating facts about cuttlefish. And I think it's really important that you know, like, where these sort of the context of this cuttlefish, and are more familiar with this material that you're going to be using. So now we're going to move on to the actual cuttlefish. It's called cuttlefish bone, but it's really more like a shell. And something, again, really fascinating about a cuttlefish is that this shell is what keeps them buoyant, and they actually have control over the buoyancy in their bodies. So this is what we are going to be using to make a mold. We're going to be directly carving into this cuttlefish, and this sort of inside, or what I call the belly of the cuttlefish bone, is very, very soft. And then you'll notice the outside is really hard. Something else that I want you to pay particular attention to is the pattern on the cuttlefish. And that pattern is actually going to transfer into the design that you're going to be making. And so it's a really sort of fascinating quality of this material that we're going to be using. So we have our cuttlefish bone, and before we get started, you guys are going to be making either a pendant or a keychain, whatever your pleasure, and you're going to be drawing your initials, designing your initials into this pendant or a keychain. You can do just your first initial, or you can do your first, your middle, and your last if you want. It really depends on you in terms of how you want to approach this. But there are quite a few things that you need to keep in mind when you are designing this pendant or this keychain, okay? So you're going to want to use a pencil, preferably, and an unlined sheet of paper. It's just better if you don't have sort of visual interruptions on the page. So I would definitely get a blank piece of scrap paper, and what you're going to do is you're going to do at least 3 designs, okay? And I have some pictures of some of the designs that I've done. You're going to kind of keep it pretty simple, and you can make solid designs. So all that you see on this paper, my pendant is going to be square here. This on top is called a bail, all right? And that's what the chain is going to go through, or your keychain is going to go through that, all right? So we're going to design that into the piece, and it's really important that you design that into the piece, all right? We don't want to add that on later. It's a whole different process to add that on later, and we're not going to cover that process in class, all right? If you want to put all 3 of your initials in, you can do that as well. And so here, down here, I have like my monogram. And so my middle initial is all the way over to the right. And my last name, the initial, is in the center. So it's more like a, again, like a traditional monogram. And you're going to notice on here that the P is backwards, all right? Because some letters are going to have to be carved in backwards, so that you pour the metal in, and then when it comes out in metal, it's going to be the correct way, okay? So an A, a capital A, you would not need to draw backwards. A B, for instance, you're going to need to draw backwards. A C, D, E, I have an E down here, you're going to have to do that backwards. So in terms of the designing, you're going to have to have it exactly how you want it in your cuttlefish on your piece of paper. So if the letter has to be backwards in the cuttlefish, it needs to be backwards on your paper, okay? It's just going to help you with the layout, because we're going to be carving in the reverse, okay? So the other thing that you need to keep in mind is that we're doing what is called gravity casting, and so we need to have gravity on our side. So actually, when we pour metal into our mold, it's actually going to come from the bottom of our piece, and it's going to flow down into our piece. And so you need to keep in mind that metal does not like to flow backwards, okay? So if you are thinking about how the metal is going to come into this mold, it's going to come down into my mold, and if I had like little arms on here coming down, my metal is going to have a really hard time traveling backwards. It just does not like to do that. It also doesn't like to turn sharp corners, okay? So this design lends itself to more of a mass, so more area, okay? And less like little arms that will be coming off, sort of like a starfish, okay? You can still do some of those designs, but I just want you to keep that in mind, that at least for this first one, you want to have a significant area that you are carving out. Because when you have a mass that you're working with, the metal's going to stay hot longer, and that's going to help the metal to travel, okay? So you always want to put, this is, we're going to make a funnel, and I'll show you how to do that as well. But the metal's going to pour in again, and it's going to fill up this whole space. And we want the funnel to be in the area where there's the most amount of mass. And so the largest part of the piece, basically, we wouldn't want to put the funnel down here on this bale. We wouldn't want to put it down there because that's a very thin area. So the metal is going to cool down really fast here, and it may cool down way too much before it gets to the rest of the piece, okay? So you need to keep those things in mind when you're designing this, right? And again, you're going to do at least 3 designs, and you're going to pick one of those designs to do the actual piece. And I want to show you a couple of different examples of some finished pieces because you know, on the designs I showed you more of this round sort of pendant with a letter that is going to protrude off of the pendant, okay? So that's one way to do it, right? And another way to do it is you could just design your pendant or keychain as the full letter without the sort of background to it. See that? See the difference between these two, right? One sort of has a frame, if you will, and the other one does not. All right, here is a really small one. You see that little guy? It's really nice and small, right? So a little charm with the bail. You can see that, and you can get the bales pretty small, actually. So pretty fascinating that the metal will travel into an area in a space that small. You can also see on these, you can see this is a sheet of cuttlefish that I made. And so you can see the texture of the cuttlefish, which is one of the really interesting qualities of this type of casting. Here's another one with a rather large bale, right? So the bale doesn't have to be rounded. It could be different shapes. Your outside shape doesn't have to be rounded or circular. It could be, you know, have a flowered edge or a deckled edge. So there's all kinds of things that you could do. Someone made a heart, but she didn't think about where she was going to put her chain through, so she had to go in and drill a hole after, and that's not ideal because it's very hard to drill and it's hard to get a chain through a space that size. So again, you really want to design that hole into the piece. Here's one that's reverse, right? So it's the negative of the letter. And you could do that as well. So there you see quite a few examples of different things that you could do. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to pick which design we want to put on our cuttlefish, all right? That we want to carve into our cuttlefish. And there is a sheet that I have provided to you guys in your packet that is basically how the layout for your cuttlefish mold is going to be, all right? So you're going to notice up here, this is where I'm drawing this in because that is where your metal is going to be poured into your mold. So that funnel is really important because it's going to connect to your piece. So that metal, again, it's going to come down into your mold and it's going to fill up your mold. So you've got to have that drawing of that funnel on there. So I'm going to just pick one of these designs and I'm going to draw it on my paper. When I'm drawing it on my paper, remember, I want to make sure that the larger part of my design is connected to my funnel, all right? You want to draw your bail in, all right? So I'm going to draw that in, and I'm going to show you guys this in a minute. Now I'm going to turn this upside down so that I can draw my M in, all right? So I'm going to just draw my M in. So there you go. That's what it's going to look like on the interior of my mold. And these are the things that I'm going to be carving into my mold, okay? Now, something else that you want to keep in mind is you want to have about 1/2 of an inch, all right, from your sides, right? Remember, we're pouring molten metal that is 1,800 degrees into this mold that we're making, okay? And you don't want the metal to come out of the sides of the mold because your piece is too close to the edges, all right? Or too close to the bottom. So give yourself at least 1 inch from the bottom, all right? Because remember, this is gravity. Whoop, it's gonna pour down in here, and we don't want it to just leak down into the bottom, right? About 1 inch from the bottom, 1/2 inch on the sides, okay? Great. So now, this is where we can start actually carving and preparing the cuttlefish to make the actual mold. So you will select a piece of cuttlefish, and it's just depends if you're going to make a really big piece, a bigger piece, you'll want a bigger piece of cuttlefish. If you're going to make a smaller piece, use a smaller piece of cuttlefish, okay? So that's kind of how I choose. You're going to want to get one of these tools, which is basically a bandsaw blade that I've cut in half and put a piece of tape on the bottom, all right? And that's how we're gonna saw our cuttlefish in half. Then you will also want some dental tools that you can use for actually carving. And I have a whole box of dental tools for you guys to use. I prefer at the beginning when I'm carving away a lot of material to use a tool that has more surface area so that I can, and a bigger tool, so that I can carve more away, all right? And then when I start doing details is when I can get into sort of the dental picks. You can use your pencil to carve, actually. This material is so soft. I also have some of these guys for you to use. Just a little tool I made out of brass that has one end that's slightly pointed and another rounded end. Really good for carving out the material. All right, so all of those will be available for you guys to use. And the first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut the little nubs off of the bottom of this cuttlefish. I'm gonna make sure that my cuttlefish is supported, and just keep in mind that on the back of this cuttlefish, it's very, very hard, all right? So sometimes it's hard to go through. You need to go slowly, but you need to keep the motion going, all right? So see, it's pretty brittle, kind of crispy, all right? Now I'm gonna do that to the other side. I'm just gonna come in here and I'm gonna cut this down. So we're just preparing the mold. Don't try to force it too much or you're gonna break the cuttlefish. Again, it's pretty fragile, all right? You can see it's kind of coming apart in my hands. Now, I wanna cut this in half, all right? I'm gonna make what's called a 2-part mold. And so I'm gonna have 1 part and 2 parts by simply cutting this in half. The really great thing about cuttlefish casting, besides the texture that you can get from the cuttlefish, is that this is a very immediate casting process. It's used to make reproductions. So if I wanted to make a copy of a piece, I could actually press a piece into this mold. And we'll do that the second half of this class. The first half of this class, we're going to be carving into it. This is an old technique. It's over 5,000 years old. So it really connects us to this history and this tradition of making jewelry this way. All right, so I've cut off the bottoms, right, and then cut my piece in half. And you're going to notice that one side is generally thicker than the other side. So this piece that I have in my right hand is a little bit thicker than this piece that I have in my left hand. So I'm actually going to carve into the thicker of the piece, okay? Before I start carving though, I need to flatten out both of these pieces of cuttlefish because they're going to go together. And if I were to put them together right now, there's not much surface, right? And so what I want to do is I want to create more contact surface between these two pieces. So the way that I flatten these out is that this is a tile. This is a bathroom tile or a kitchen tile, and I'm using the back of it. So the other really great thing about cuttlefish casting is that it's really low tech. You can buy cuttlefish at your local animal supply store because they're used in bird cages. It's how birds sharpen their beak, but it's also how they get calcium. So this is just almost all calcium. All right, so in a circular motion, you are going to basically file this down, okay? So notice now my cuttlefish is almost all the way completely flat. There's still one edge over here that is a little bit lower, so I'm going to sand down a little bit more. All right, so that's really good. And now you can really see that texture. So you see how this one side is flat and the other side is not. So we're going to get that other side so that it is nice and flat. Again, you're going to want to use a circular motion. Oh yeah, okay, great. So now both sides are pretty flat, right? So when I put these together now, look at that. There's like no space, right? So the chances of metal leaking out are pretty slim, right? They're not the exact same size. You see how one side is a little bit longer on the bottom, but that's okay. You don't need to worry about that. If you want to, you could always cut this bottom part off, but honestly, it's not that necessary to have them be totally even on the bottom. On the top, you want them to be nice and even. Okay, so I'm going to determine which part is the thickest, and again, that's the part that I'm going to carve into. And I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to draw exactly what I have on here, okay? So just with my pencil, I'm going to first draw my funnel. I want to make my funnel pretty wide at the top. Again, that's because I'm going to be pouring metal directly into this. And I want to make, that's the hole. I'm creating the hole where the metal is going to go. And I want that hole to be big so that I know that that metal is going to make it into my mold, right? So can you see that? Yeah, so that's my funnel I'm going to carve. And now I'm going to carve in the actual charm or keychain. Maybe we'll make this a keychain. All right, so I have my box here. Now I'm going to put my M in there, so I don't have to do it upside down. I'm just going to turn my cuttlefish right side up. right? There's my M. And now I'm going to put my bail on there, right? I'm going to make it kind of big. So I want it to be nice and sturdy. All right. Look at that. Look at my big old bail, all right? So that's a design decision. So you determine how big you want that bail, how small you want that bail, what shape you want that bail. Same with your text, okay? So the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this tool here. You could use this tool, or you could use one that is sort of shaped like this, right? So we're gonna be removing a lot of material. And the first material that I'm gonna remove is actually gonna be that square. So I'm just going to scrape that out, right? It's as easy as that. You're just gonna scrape it out. And I'm gonna try to get it as even as possible. I also don't want it to be too deep, because if it's too deep, then my piece is gonna be really heavy. And I don't want a really heavy piece. So this is a 1-part mold. So we're just going to be carving on one side. We'll have time later on in this class to explore 2-part. Right now, this is 1 part. And you notice what I'm doing is I'll remove material, and then I'll kind of shake off all that dust that I'm creating. Now I'm going to go in with a little bit smaller tool, and I'm going to remove a little bit less material, but just so I can get this nice and even, all right? So now I'm just evening things up. So you guys, for class next Monday, I want you all to come in with at least 3 designs. You also will need to have long sleeve shirts and long pants, and closed-toed shoes, because you're going to actually be casting, right? And you cannot wear workout pants because they're synthetic, and we're going to heat our metal up to 1,800 degrees, and you don't want hot metal to hit synthetic pants because they'll melt. Yep, they'll melt. Okay, so look, now I have dug my little frame, if you will, okay? And now I'm going to carve my initial into that frame. And I actually think I'm going to use a pencil to do that. I like the way the pencil carves, because it gives me a nice sort of rounded line instead of a really hard line. I'll show you this in just 1 second. And this is good that I'm using the pencil, because then you can see it. Look, there's my M. M for Mary. All right? So hopefully it's clear up to this point. And just so you know, you guys will have time to ask Lupe questions after I'm done doing this. Now I want to carve my bail. Okay, so carve my bail. It's a little wonky, but I don't mind. You know, this is handmade. You cannot make these things perfect. The beauty of making something by hand is that you can see the hand in the process. You can see the imperfections, if you will. All right, so I did my bail, and now So, yep, did my bail, and now I'm just gonna carve out my funnel. I'm gonna make it deep, y'all. Right? This is where you go deep. You also want to make it smooth, right? Metal doesn't like sharp edges when it is in the liquid state. If it hits hard edges, it actually will kind of shake around like this, and that'll make the metal have divots in it, little holes in it, right? So I get my funnel kind of as smooth as possible. So now you can see the metal is going to travel, right? Great. The next thing that I want to do is I want to put keys. Another good thing for this tool is that you can use it to move your cuttlefish dust or cuttlefish crumbs out of the way. And something actually that I didn't mention before I got started is that you need to put brown paper down on your bench before you start working. So every class, the very first thing that you're going to do after you put your backpack down is you're going to go grab a brown piece of paper, and they're actually located over by the sink. To the left of the sink, you'll see a roll of the brown paper, okay? So make sure you put that down, because again, there's a lot of dust here. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to use these, they're called keys, all right? And probably need to order some more of these. There's a couple of different kinds of keys in here. There are ones that are actual nuts, right, for a screw. And then there's another kind that look like little cones that have little spikes on the bottom of them. I'm going to use the ones that are the cones with the spikes on the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press these into the cuttlefish, the side where I've done my design. So what are these for? These are for registration. So when I put the two sides together, they'll go back always into the same spot. Because when we start doing two-part molds, when we start drawing on the front and the backs of these, you'll want your mold to line up so the front is where it's supposed to be and the back is where it's supposed to be. So these are keys for registration. You don't want the keys too close to the edge because the cuttlefish is so fragile. So I put two at the top and two at the bottom. The other thing that these registration keys do is they hold your mold together. And you really want this mold to be held together because you don't want metal to, again, come out the bottom or come out the sides. And that happens. It does. Like, look, here is an example from a student's piece. Like, she poured this way, right? And all of the metal came out through the bottom. You could see even where her key was. It went around her key. So what do? She could have used this piece, but we said do it over. It doesn't take long to make one of these molds. So and it would give her more practice. Here's another one where it came out of the bottom. Although this one turned out pretty cool for coming out the bottom. These are called fins when that happens. All right, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my piece, my bottom piece, and I'm going to gently, very gently, right? I'm gonna rock, right? I don't wanna do this quickly. I wanna do it slowly, and I'm basically pushing one side down, not on the edge, I'm more in the middle, and I'm pushing both sides together. So one side and then the other. One side and then the other. One side and then the other. You get the point, right? All right, so I do that to the top, and I do that at the bottom. The bottom's a little trickier because it's much more fragile. So just be careful. Now I'm going to take this apart because what happens is that dust will compress in here, right? So I could actually go in here and open these up now because I have a mark, right, where these are supposed to be. So I can open them up manually and I can remove some of that dust that has been compacted in there, all right? And actually, I'm gonna open these up just a hair more. This will help so that I don't break this really fragile material, right? So just kind of opening it up. I'm gonna squish it. You don't want to rush through this process, okay? You want to take your time. And I can see I have some space there, so I need to actually get these even closer together. I'm really pushing now. See? Really pushing. All right, so it's together. And I have this opening, but I want to make that opening bigger. But I want that opening to line up with the opening on the other side. So I'm just going to make a little mark for myself, mark on the inside of the cuttlefish, right? So now I'm going to open it up, and look, I have the mark where I should carve out that other side. So I'm just going to come in, and I'm going to, again, remove that material. So you guys bring a pencil to class, and if you have any carving tools, by chance, bring those to class. Maybe some of you guys have taken a ceramics class before, or you have done some Sculpey. Those tools all work really well for this. So be looking around your environment for things that could be used as a tool. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is, you saw how all that cuttlefish dust had been compacted into the mold. And so I'm just going to take a fine brush, and I am going to brush out that dust. And that is going to expose more of that cuttlefish texture. So if you want the cuttlefish texture, I want you all to brush out your mold, all right? If you don't want much of that texture, then leave your mold as is, okay? Because it will compact into that mold and you won't be able to get all those textures. Okay, so I'm just having a look at this. Like, is it as even as I want it to be? Is my hole big enough? It's looking real good. You see in there? I'm just looking to make sure that metal's going to go into that space. And it's looking real good, okay? I might open it up just a hair more on this side. Okay, just a hair more. All right, that's looking good, all right? And you see the purpose of those registration keys and the importance of them. They're incredibly important, right? All right, so now my mold is ready to go, which is pretty amazing that I can make a mold in this short amount of time with some pretty readily available tools, right? And again, you can get this at a pet supply shop. They're usually smaller at the pet supply shop, so you're kind of limited in terms of what size piece you can make. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take this painter's tape, and guess what? This is what's going to hold our mold together, which again, pretty low tech here. You really want to make sure this mold is held together though, you guys. You don't want it to pull apart. And why don't you want it to pull apart? Because you do not want metal coming out of the sides of your molds. All right? We're going to, be using all the safety precautions, but you want to be really careful. All right, so my mold is ready to go. I'm ready to pour metal into here. I want to tell you a little bit about the metal that we're going to be using. This is bronze, and it actually comes in these little granules. It's called casting grain, or I don't know. It looks a little bit like caviar, right? We got some metal caviar here, and this is bronze. We're going to use sterling silver in our second project, but in our first, in our first project, we're going to use bronze. Hold on one second. So bronze is an alloy. A-L-L-O-Y. And what's an alloy? An alloy is a mix of two or more metals to make a metal. And what metal makes bronze? This bronze that we're using is called antique bronze, and it is 90% copper and 10% zinc, right? So that makes it an alloy. There's different types of bronzes, and the different types of bronzes have to do with their different percentages of bronze and zinc. Copper and zinc. And I really like this one because it has a lot of copper in it. It has a really high melting temperature. I mentioned that it was 1,800 degrees. Let me just double check, because 1,820 degrees Fahrenheit is the melting temperature of bronze, all right? And I hope you guys, while I'm doing this, that you're all taking notes, because remember, for each class that we have, I want you guys to be keeping your journal, if you will, your sort of observations about what you're learning, how you're learning. Part of this class is also learning how you learn. Are you someone who learns by reading something? Are you someone who learns by writing? Are you someone who learns by seeing? Or are you someone who learns by doing? And one of the reasons I love teaching art, and especially jewelry and metalsmithing, is because I get to teach to each one of those learning styles. So I want you to be seeing how you learn, or discovering how you learn. Our mantra for this class too is experiment to learn something new. I think that that's another thing that I want you all to be paying attention to, is experimenting and trying things. And when you're carving out your cuttlefish, maybe you're like, what if I do this? Or what if I do that? Or what if, and you kind of think about it as an experiment instead of a finished piece that you're going to be graded on, okay? Because it's more about what you're learning and the process, and how well you're listening, and how you can apply what you have been learning to an actual piece. So I just want you to keep those things in mind. The next thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to pour the mold and pour the metal into the mold. So we're gonna turn the camera over to this area over here. And hopefully you guys can see everything. What I'm gonna do is I have a pan that is filled with sand, all right? And I'm gonna put my mold down into the sand. And I'm gonna make a little hill just to hold my piece in place, okay? So then I have something called a crucible. And the crucible is a very high temperature ceramic bowl that has been coated with, it's called flux. And the flux creates a barrier. It's almost like a glassy-like barrier so that my metal doesn't stick to the ceramic, okay? And so I have this glassy surface here. I'm gonna put my metal into my crucible. I'm gonna heat it up with a torch. And then when it is melted, I am going to line the edge of my crucible. I wonder if I can take this out. All right. I'm going to line the edge of my crucible, right? There's a lip on my crucible. I'm going to line my edge up to the cuttlefish and I'm going to pour it in. And I have one chance, all right? So if you mess this up the first time, we're going to say, that's great. What did you learn from that experience? Now let's do it again. So another aspect of this class is how you deal with something that doesn't work the first time. And you're going to have a lot of perseverance because you're going to have to do this maybe more than once, and that's okay. So I've got my metal in a bowl here, and you guys, I'm just going to have to eyeball how much metal I think I need. So it's better to have more than less. So I'm going to add a little bit more. And I'm going to have my metal sitting over to the side. You have to wear glasses when you're doing this process. You also have to have on a safety coat. We're going to wear a fire safety coat. So I'm going to put that on. And that's this green coat. So I'll put this on. Usually we'll be casting over in the soldering area, but for purposes of this demo, we're just going to do it right here. So I've got my safety glasses on, so everything is tinted green, and my jacket, got that on, check. All right, here is my torch. You guys are all going to learn how to turn on this torch, how to turn it off. You're going to be holding the torch and melting the metal, and I'm going to be walking you through the steps. For today, I'll be doing this, of course, and the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the gas, right? And then I have this striker here, and I'm going to strike, right? There's my gas, right? So yeah, this is a big torch. It's also really dirty gas. It's acetylene and oxygen. And now I'm going to turn on the oxygen. And I'm looking for a flame that is, let me point this out. I'm looking for a flame that has these little fingers. Do you see how there's like this bushy, a little bit bushy out here? So you want it to be bushy out here. The hottest part of the flame is just in front of that blue tip, and there's a lot of oxygen there. So you want to heat here, okay? You don't want to heat here. And the reason you don't want to heat there is because the metal will get very, very dirty if you heat there. All right? So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to heat up my crucible, because my crucible has to be nice and hot before I put my metal in. I'm going to turn this up just a little bit hotter than I normally would, just to get my crucible nice and hot. So everybody will be wearing glasses when they do this process. And you'll have your jacket on. You'll have long pants. And you're going to be really paying attention, right? What are you paying attention to? You are paying attention to this flame, right? This flame You do not want the flame to be in like this. That's way too close, okay? And how do I know if it's too close? When this orange flame touches this torch tip, it's too close. So you're gonna come back a little bit. And look, can you see that? Can you see how it's starting to heat up there? Yeah, it's looking good. See that? I want that to be nice and orange. Gonna get it really hot. I don't want to put cold metal into a cold crucible because it will just take a lot longer for me to heat and it's a waste of gas, all right? So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move my flame over to the left and I'm gonna pour my metal in. I'm gonna pour it directly into my crucible. Now I'm gonna come over and I'm gonna start heating my metal. And I'm just gonna heat and heat and heat. And Ruda, will you do me a huge favor? There is a thing of a triangular thing of water over on that back table. Triangular, a rectangle. Will you grab that and bring it over here?
Like this thing?
Yes, ma'am.
Where do you want it?
You can put it right there. Great, thank you. Ruda's my helper today, thank goodness. So can you see what's happening with the metal? So what's happening with the metal is it is slowly starting to melt. It's doing what's called sweating, where it's slowly starting to melt together. So we've got this sweating happening, and after the sweat, then you're going to see the granules start to form into one sort of molten blob. Do you see that blob? It almost looks like mercury. And can you see that? Can you see how it's really, you can't? Okay. Well, it's very, very molten. And now I'm going to come over, I'm going to keep heating my metal. You want to keep heating your metal, and then I'm going to pour my metal in. Oh, perfect, perfect. Okay, so now when I turn off the torch, I'm going to turn off the oxygen and then the gas. Okay, so hang with me. Now you can see that, whoa, that is really, really, really hot. I got that metal super, super hot. Almost a little bit too hot. It was probably hotter than 1,800 degrees. So I'm gonna let it cool down for a second. While it's cooling down, I'm gonna take another sip of water. So we'll let it cool. I'm gonna let that orange glow go out of it just a little bit.
It looks white on the screen.
Okay, well, it looks white on the screen, but it's actually orange. So we're going to let that cool down just a little bit more. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to quench this in water. We're going to submerge it in water. And because this is a video, what you are not getting about this process is the smell, right? And I mean, it smells right now. It smells like burning hair and burning fingernails. And yes, it doesn't smell too pleasant. So now my piece is cooling down. I could let it cool down just a little bit longer, and maybe I will. I'll maybe let it cool down just a hair longer. So just a few reminders, you guys. Don't forget to bring in designs. I want them on paper that doesn't have lines on it. At least 3, 4 or 5 is really great. 3 is the minimum, and then you can sort of pick which one you think will work the best. And then don't forget, there's 2 events that are happening this week. There is an actual lecture a woman who is Lauren Haynes, who's going to be talking about her role as a curator and what that means, and some of the projects that she's curated. And then we're going to have an art party on Friday night. Okay, so that's pretty much cooled down. I'm sorry you couldn't see the actual color, but you'll experience this when you are actually starting to cast.
You could see it orange later.
Okay, so now you can see it's black on top, and all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna put it in water, and you're gonna hear that water boiling, and you're gonna feel it, right? It's pretty intense, right? So when it stops boiling, you can pick up your piece. You have to save those keys, all right? It's so important that you save those keys. Are you ready for this? You ready? My piece actually just came right out. Check it out. There it is. And now look at that big old button. That's called a button, okay? Now I'm gonna show you guys next week how to cut that off. So we'll be cutting that off. But what I want to point out is that you do not want the button to be too thick at the top, because remember, we're cutting this off and we're gonna cut it off with a saw. So it's gotta be really thin where it, or pretty thin where it hits your piece, all right? So can you guys see that? It's pretty cool, right? So then I have my mold, and guess what? I can never use my mold again because it's a one-time deal. But I'm just gonna open it up. I'm gonna take my keys out. Look at that. Woohoo! Make sure they're not hot before I touch them, right? You gotta use a lot of common sense in this class. If you don't, you'll get burnt. And I've never had a student get burnt, so we're good. All right, so what do you do with this? You just throw it away. And if there's time, I'm gonna have Lupe actually pour this other one that I made for you guys so that you can see what it's like. And I think that's it for today. I will see you guys next Monday. And again, if anyone has any questions, don't hesitate to ask Lupe. And you guys can always email me if you have any questions. And I look forward to seeing you all next Monday. Thanks so much for your attention. Bye, guys.